All right. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of 10 Minute Poker Tips. I got a special guest today. His name is Craig Chait. He is a mixed game player expert extraordinaire. 1.8 million, I think, in hand and mob earnings. He's got a ring and all that good stuff. Definitely a regular on the mixed game scene. And I know a very feared player on the mixed game scene as well. So thank you for coming on, Craig.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Derek.
So what Craig is going to do for us today is, I think there's a lot of poker players out there, especially a lot of Hold'em players, who would love to play mixed games. They heard it's a lot of fun. Definitely a switch up from playing Hold'em all the time. So if you had to give some recommendations to beginner poker players or no limit Hold'em players who want to break into mixed games without getting themselves killed over the first couple of months trying to try new games, what would be some of your tips? What would be some of your recommendations?
Yeah, so some of the recommendations I have is the LAPC is a good place to kind of dip your toe into mixed games. They have anywhere between $400 buy-ins and $1,000 buy-ins. No limit players want to take a shot at an 08 or a stud game for $400. It's not that bad a price point for them. And then, some of the local casinos in Vegas, like the Orleans and some of those places have $200 tournaments. So there's some good price points, to take some cheap shots just to learn mixed games. There's not really sims, like they have, in No Limit. There's no real GTO draw games and this and that. Dipping your feet in is probably the best way to go for cheap. That price point you're comfortable in. Like Sean Yu started, and Sean Yu's one of the better mixed game players now. And Sean Yu, he was
Yeah.
a No Limit player forever. Pitts, Anthony. I always butcher his last name, so I call him
Bethesda.
Pitts.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. He became a really good, PLO 8 player and Omaha 8 player. Was only No Limit at one time. Nikhil Guerra, plays the horse and some other stuff. So a lot of No Limit players are finding that mixed games are a lot more fun. They're finding the player pools are a lot more friendly, especially if they know you're just learning the games. They'll kind of help you out in actually a nice way at the table. And it's a different atmosphere than the No Limit. You see a lot less headphones than you do in No Limit. You see a lot more talking, a lot more engaging. Poker Go Studio was unbelievable, the past couple days. And there's kind of like a camaraderie with the mixed game community because it's a lot smaller than the No Limit community. So everyone kind of knows each other. You see each other at the same events. You're battling against all these people. And, the No Limit fields, they can be thousands of people, sometimes tens of thousands of people if it's the main event. You may know 5% of the field. You might know 50+% of the field in the mixed game. So it's just a lot different.
So it sounds like you're recommending people just to kind of jump in and play and get started. So they shouldn't be just sitting there watching YouTube videos for 3 weeks trying to get started. Just learn the rules, jump in, and just start playing, right?
Yeah. Just learn the basic rules. Kind of emulate what the better players are doing. Watch some of the Poker Go stuff because the Poker Go mixed games are now streamed. So you can watch those, watch some of the World Series stuff. You can, there's a couple books out there. Dylan Lindy's got a mixed game book that has pretty good reviews. Read a couple books, but mostly it's just jumping in, to be honest with you. When I first started learning mixed games, I went downstairs and they had, I think it was 4080 mix in commerce when LAPC was in its heyday, and they had all the mixed games going and the cash games. And I just started playing. And, I took some licks early learning because what I learned was it's a lot different having 4 cards or 5 cards and your starting hands, everything seems to be playable. It's if you're playing a draw game, it's oh, wow, I can get 3 or 4 new cards. Sweet. So especially in the draw games, I was very leaky in my starting hands. And so learning what an acceptable starting hand is compared to what is, too loose where you're going to get destroyed for draw games. I mean, that's number one thing. And same thing with 08. Learning what an acceptable starting hand is to begin with, and then you can deviate from there as you learn more about the games. Just like No Limit. When I started to learn No Limit, people told me just play blackjack hands, right? Ace king, ace queen, queen queen, king king, ace ace, and don't open anything less than ace 10, ace jack. I was one of those basic players that probably was better back in the day when I was basic and I didn't know about implied odds and all this other crap that gets me in trouble and making these ridiculous moves with jack deuce from the small blinds. Get that one, Derek?
And 5-8 offsuit.
So, yeah, but, as you learn more about the games, you learn more about the intricacies of the games, you can kind of figure things out. But keeping things basic when you're first learning the games with regards to your starting hands, whether it's stud, whether it's Omaha 8, whether it's Badoogie, Badacey, or any of the draw games, playing solid starting hands is a good starting point because the important thing in mixed games is you don't burn through big bets. a big bet saved is a big bet earned. It's not like, no limit really, because you think about it, you have odds all the way through the hand, basically, if you're in the hand.
Yep.
You're getting 4-1, you're getting 5-1, you're getting 6-1 on the river. You might be getting 8-1. It's like, oh, it's only one more bet. But that one more bet turns into 2, 3, 4, 5 big bets, where later in the tournament, those are going to add up. And you're going to wish you had those chips to fire later in the tournament, as you wasted them early in the tournament, just making a call because you had 8-1. And you're like, I know I'm not good here, but it's only one bet. Saving bets in mixed games is very important. It's like making a really good fold in no limit. Sometimes a really good fold is actually better than what's the other result of a good fold, or making a good call, I think it is. But
it's funny, the similarities, and it's probably a little bit reductionist, right? But even with no limit hold'em, it is cleaning up your pre-flop ranges, because they're just going to get you in a lot of trouble when you're playing too wide of a range and too many hands. And then also just learning how to fold, right? Even when you're getting the odds, sometimes you're just beaten. You kind of have to let hands go. So it looks like mixed games have some similarities in how you start and plug leaks. You're also a no limit hold'em player. How would you, and I know there's a wide range of mixed games, but how would you recommend no limit hold'em players think a little bit differently, right, when they're going to mixed games, especially when a lot of the games are kind of like limit bets, like you're saying? But what type of almost framework would be a little bit different?
Yeah, so one of the main things that I see no limit players do when they come over to mix is they'll bluff in spots where there's a 0% chance of that bluff working, because it is only one bet. They'll run these lines that would make sense in no limit that just don't make sense in like an Omaha 8 or a stud game or something like that. Sometimes they do work because it'll confuse like a mixed game player's program to think a certain way, but a lot of times you're just burning through bets because the bluff's never getting through because the story doesn't make sense. The stories are different in mixed games than they are in no limit. As more information comes up with the cards, especially in stud, stud's more about, card memorization, seeing how many outs you have there to make your hand, seeing how many of their cards are out there already and are dead. There's a lot more of that. You really have to pay attention a lot more instead of putting in an autopilot, because the cards do matter. And in draw games, it's like if you're playing deuce to 7 and you see 3 of the 7s, your opponent's hand is probably capped at an 8 or a 9 because you've already seen 3 of the 7s and they're not going to probably have them. So it's similar to no limit, where you sit down, you look at your opponents, and you kind of just, I don't want to say you stereotype them, but you categorize them: over folder, under folder. So in mixed games, the older folders, you can open their big blind more. You can bet flop more if they don't have it. These are the guys that are going to play standard, where they're only going to continue if they have a big draw, and they're only going to bet if they have it. And then you have your underfolders. They love to see cards, and they're just going to be in the hand regardless of whether it makes sense or not. Those are kind of the people that, you don't want to bluff, because they're going to call you with 1 and 2 pair of hands in spots where they should never call. Flush draw, pleated flush, straight, river, you bet out, and they're just calling off with 2 pair, and you're like, you're good. Player identification is just as important in mixed games as it is in no limit. Just as you would waste, big blinds in no limit making the wrong move against the wrong opponent, you'll waste big bets in mixed games if you make the wrong move against the wrong opponent.
So there are so many mixed games as well. If you had to recommend no limit hold'em players or new players, just try a couple, right? Like what are the best ones to kind of get their feet wet with mixed games?
So it doesn't spread very often, but the principle-wise, the best game for no-limit players to start with is deuce to 7 single draw. And the reason I say that is because it's a no-limit variant. And what you're basically doing is it's all about balancing. There's one draw, and you're balancing your bluffs and your made hands. It's like pretty much 50-50. It's just, you make it a guessing game, kind of like you do when you bet out in no limit throughout an overbet. It's pretty polarized, right? Either they have it or they don't. It's similar to no limit. Let's say you're on a one draw and someone padded, but you padded a jack, and the one draw just bombed. They either have, an 8 or a 9, or they paired, or they have nothing and they're bluffing. So then you gotta just kind of decipher through all the BS about what type of, is this player capable? Once again, it's player identification. If the player's capable, you're going to lean more towards calling with the jack. If the player isn't capable and they're only doing that with a made hand, you're going to fold the jack more often. So I recommend deuce to 7 single draw to every no limit player, just because they can bet all their stack at one time, and it's all about balancing.
And could you tell us a little bit more about deuce to seven and maybe give us your top 3 tips?
So, deuce to seven, the best hand, deuce 3, 4, 5, 7. Flushes do count. You can't have a flush. To be a non-flush, deuce 3, 4, 5, 7. You cannot make a straight. If you have a 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, no good. Or 6, whatever it is. Straights aren't good. I'd keep it simple to start. Once again, it's hand selection. Late position, you could probably open a decent 2-draw. On the button, if you have a 7 and a deuce, you can open a 3-draw. If you're in early position, I would keep it to a really strong 2-draw or a 1-draw or a pat hand. Similar to no limit, right? Like, when people are in early position, they tend to have stronger hands than when they're on the cutoff or the button. Playing, a good 2-draw, 8-6, you don't want to draw to straight. So like people look down, they see 8, 7, 6, 5. It's a dead hand. You hit a 4, you make a straight. You hit a 9, you hit a straight. So you're really only drawing to a 2 and a 3. I see a lot of inexperienced players draw to they think, I got deuce 3, 4, 5. It's a dead hand because a 6 is dead. You're really only drawing to a 7 and an 8. So when you're drawing to these straight hands where you're not drawing smooth, let's say you have 7, 5, 3 deuce. 7, 5, 3 deuce. Yeah. You have a 1-card 7 draw. You don't have a straight draw in your range. You can make 2 7s. You can make a wheel and a 76. You can also make an 87, which is usually good at showdown. And you can also make a 97, which is good at showdown more than 50% of the time too. Staying away from straight draws is probably the number one, unless you want to turn your straight into a bluff. That's the only reason, which if you have a 7 straight, it has no showdown value, pairs against anything. So you probably want to bluff that if you're going to play it. That's the one recommendation is make sure you're drawing smooth and make sure you're drawing to hands that cannot make
I have played a little deuce to 7, and I remember my only mixed game tournament ever was deuce to 7 in some other game that I don't remember. And it was actually a lot of fun. The other players were so helpful to me. I was just like, hi everyone, you might know me as a no limit Hold'em player. I have no idea what I'm doing. And everyone was so helpful. They were so patient. I just kept forgetting when I was supposed to bet versus not. So Craig, thank you so much for all this. This was fantastic. I think the community is going to love all your tips and tricks on how to get into mixed games and all your recommendations, even for stuff like deuce to 7. So thank you so much for coming on, buddy. This is awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Derek.